Greetings, drowsy spirit. Tonight, I will tell you a story that will help you fall asleep soundly. Remember to subscribe for more bedtime stories and like the video before we start. Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is in the comment section. I would also love to know what story you would want to hear next. The summer my family relocated from Arkansas to northern Texas, I was 11 years old. My father had secured a new position overseeing equipment contracts at a building company. Additionally, the adjustment was simpler than it may have been otherwise because my brother and I were homeschooled. My parents were hesitant to purchase a home right away, so we stayed with my Aunt Rachel while they searched. Uncle Mike and I lived in a little brick two-story home on the outskirts of a suburb outside of Denton. The cousins were all together for the first time in years. My cousin Crew, my younger brother Luke, and my older sister Hannah were present. Tyler, who was nearly my shadow and only a year older than me, and Claire, his younger sister. Yes, we battled like siblings, but we also had a unique bond that made each day seem like a new adventure. I was restless and inquisitive about everything at that age. For us children, the regulations felt more like chains than like protection as the nights dragged on in languid, sticky waves of Texas heat. Our parents were one and the same authority each time they went out together. Don't do anything foolish, lock the doors, and remain inside. Consequently, we naturally spent half of our time planning how to violate that regulation. All of the parents had gone to a steakhouse that evening. My mother gave each of us a direct glance at the front door before she left. Don't leave. It's not for a dare, soda, or fries. You understand? Indeed, ma'am. Like a practice choir, we sang in unison. The air within the house, however, altered as soon as their tail lights vanished down the block. It was Claire who broke first. "Ice cream," she said in a theatrical whisper. "Brownies with chocolate fudge. I want Ben and Jerry's." Tyler gave an eye roll. "We don't even have any." "That's the point," she replied. "We go get some." My 16-year-old sister Hannah, who had just received her driver's license, leaned back against the kitchen counter and twirled the car keys that her father had left hanging. The drive takes about 10 minutes. CVS has everything Luke was excited about, including ice cream and chocolates. Tacos, too. Tacos is what I desire. My stomach turned over with nerves and exhilaration. I wasn't bold enough to propose leaving covertly, but I also wasn't going to pass up the opportunity. I mentioned we'd have to move quickly and silent. "We're dying if they find out," Hannah said bluntly, as though it were the easiest arithmetic problem in the world. "Then we don't get caught." The choice was made. Hannah turned on the air conditioner, which sputtered to life as we crammed ourselves into Dad's Ford Taurus. For someone sneaking out for the first time with 3 minors in the back seat, she appeared way too self-assured behind the wheel. The night air was heavy. The roads were fairly quiet except for the occasional car buzzing past, and Tyler mumbled next to me, "This is the dumbest smart idea ever." "Shut up," I said, smiling despite the nerves gnawing at my gut. Our plans changed the way only children's plans can when the glow of fast food signs came in front of us. "Forget CVS," whispered Hannah, grinning at the red sign that was flashing. "Jack in the Box." We hadn't eaten it since moving away years ago, so the very concept made my heart race. Tyler murmured, "Tacos." I mumbled, "Curly fries." The drive-through line was long around the building, so Hannah parked and escorted us to the front. When I first entered, I was struck by how strangely silent it was. A cashier was leaning against the counter, barely appearing to be awake, and a fryer was hissing in the background. Then this girl appeared at the fountain machine. Despite the humid night, she had a small frame wrapped in oversized winter clothing, and she asked for a water cup before filling it to the brim with Sprite. Her hands trembled a little as she brought it to her lips, and she drank like someone who hadn't tasted liquid in days. We stood by the door, not intending to watch. The girl turned, and I saw her eyes, wide and unblinking, as if they had been carved out of fear itself. Her eyes briefly locked on mine, and my chest tightened before my eyes fell to her hand, which held a butcher's knife, shining in the fluorescent lights. "Holy," Tyler hissed, "she's got a knife." "Shut up," Hannah yelled beneath her breath, moving ahead of us out of instinct. The girl passed slowly and deliberately, holding a knife in one hand and a cup in the other. She pushed through the glass door and disappeared into the night without turning around. The cashier scowled and said something to himself, but he remained motionless. Tyler muttered, "What the hell was that?" I had a dry throat. She gave me a direct glance. After that, the food didn't seem important, but we nevertheless placed our order. Fries, tacos, and a few shakes. I saw the cashier's eyes flicker uncomfortably toward the door as he accepted our money, as if nothing had happened. To get to the car, we carried our trays. I saw the girl again as Hannah pulled out of the lot. She never even looked at the cars that swerved to avoid her as she crossed the busy roadway in the direction of a CVS. "She's crazy," Hannah whispered. "She poses a threat." Tyler made the correction. I desired to bury the discomfort behind greasy food and laughs. Forget her. We succeeded for a short time, stuffing fries into our mouths and making jokes about how we were now officially rebels. Then the lights appeared. Red and blue reflected off all the reflecting surfaces as a dozen police cruisers sped by us. They overran the entrance to the CVS parking lot and blocked it. Whispering, "Oh my God," Claire said. "Don't," Hannah cautioned. "It's her." However, it was already too late. In us, curiosity had its claws. She followed, turning the wheel. Before we could go very far, an officer stopped us. A flash of light pierces the windshield. He said, "Evening," with firmness. Hannah said in a weak voice, "What are you kids doing here?" "Just a jack-in-the-box, we were." "Go outside." We did what we were told. Tension was in the air in the parking lot. Radios spouting static, officers yelling orders. I thought I heard a scream somewhere, close to the entryway. The officer lowered himself just enough to meet my gaze. Was there anyone out of the ordinary at Jack-in-the-Box tonight? I took a deep breath. A knife-wielding girl. Across the street, she went. The officer clenched his jaw. He looked at his companion. We were not permitted to be close to the CVS entrance, but the rumors quickly circulated. "That's her. Call it in." After charging inside, the girl had seized a woman by the hair and put the sword to her throat. Chaos reigned for a few minutes, with people yelling and attempting to pull her away, but nobody dared approach her too closely. She yelled and struggled like something possessed until being finally subdued by the officers. We didn't stay to witness the conclusion. After taking our names and reprimanding Hannah for leaving us so late, the cops sent us home. Our parents were waiting at the house. They were too serene to be safe, and their features were unreadable. The words "sit down," my mother whispered softly. We did what we were told. Aunt Rachel inquired, "What did you do tonight?" Tyler interrupted Hannah as she opened her lips to say, "Nothing. Just stayed here, played games." It was useless. After exchanging glances, our mothers turned back to face us. "Don't lie," urged my mother. "We know," Claire muttered. "How?" "Facebook," said Aunt Rachel. Someone posted about 3 heroic kids who saw the knife-wielding girl at Jack-in-the-Box and told the police. Heroic? Tyler laughed. We were merely inquisitive. Even though their look relaxed, the atmosphere was still oppressive with the weight of the night. My mother brushed a lock of hair away from my face as she reached over. "You don't realize how close you came," she stated. "That could have been you in that CVS. That could have been you with a knife at your throat." The room became quiet. I tried not to imagine her wide, scared eyes as I looked at my hands, the taco greasy smell still on my shirt. While time can blunt edges, it cannot erase them. When I'm by myself, I recall how her eyes met mine, yet Tyler and I still occasionally joke about the jackknife night, as if it were some half-baked escapade. We might have been involved. The outcome might have been different. And that same chill creeps back every time I go past a Jack-in-the-Box at night. Similar to how danger can unexpectedly enter via glass doors, and the glimmer of a dagger can ruin innocence. That ice cream was never delivered to us. Only tacos, police lights, and memories that will always be with me. My family and I have always had a complex relationship, but if I'm being completely honest, our shared love of the great outdoors was what held us all together. In the little Texas town of Jasper, my dad Raymond put in a lot of overtime as a diesel mechanic. Additionally, he was the type of man who rarely smiled, but always brightened up when we organized a trip to the West. Lucas, my 17-year-old younger brother, was a wiry child with a sarcastic streak that could drive anyone insane and an excessive amount of restless energy. My mom didn't want to go on the vacation because of the strained marriage between my parents by March 2015. Dad, Lucas, and I were the only ones there at the end. At the time, I was 20 years old, midway through college, and I'm often caught between wanting to be independent and feeling bound by the traditional family routines. Mostly out of shame, I agreed to my dad's suggestion of a week-long camping trip across West Texas and into the desert. I reasoned that perhaps we too needed this. Our equipment, 2 tents, sleeping bags, a gas stove, and enough food for a week of basic meals were all packed into a white Dodge minivan that we rented from a location in Houston. Dad always had this obstinate streak that made him think we could wing it if something went wrong, even though he was meticulous about preparation. All the way out of town, Lucas joked about it. "Are you certain this van can, Dad? Manage the end of the world?" he said, bending forward from the rear seat. Dad gave a grunt. "It will take us to our destination. Don't complain before we've even reached San Antonio." I laughed, attempting to act as a mediator. Perhaps Lucas refrained from using sarcasm until after the initial gas stop. He grinned. "No asurances." The actual drive was lengthy, spanning level plains that appeared to engulf the sky. The wind kept blowing dust across the pumps as we stopped at the POS for petrol. We camped at a small family-run RV park on the borders of Pine Hollow Canyon, a location that most people outside of Texas had never heard of on the 3rd day of the trip. I recall my dad saying, "Once you hit this part of Texas, you're in another world." Although the canyon was not as well known as the Guadalupe Mountains or Big Bend, Dad had heard from colleagues that the hiking paths were breathtaking and challenging, the kind that made you feel humbled. Dad made the decision that morning that we would try the 14-mile loop trail that went around the edge of the canyon. Declaring, "No packs," he slapped the map onto the van's hood. "We'll be fine. Just water bottles and some trail mix." I sighed. "Dad, 14 miles is a long way." Lucas gave a snort. What could possibly go wrong? We were slightly sunburned, already full of enthusiasm. I glanced at the two of them and realized I was not going to prevail in this dispute. "All right," I sighed, "but I'll be haunting you both if we die out here." It was a hard hike. We weren't prepared for the impact of the elevation shifts. Our legs were as stiff as lead by the time the sun started to set. The crunch of boots on gravel and Lucas's sporadic moans were the only sounds we heard throughout the last few miles. It was deserted when we eventually staggered into the trailhead parking area. Only our white van remained, glimmering dimly in the last of the sun. The arid chill pierced the air, and that was more than I bargained for, Dad murmured as Lucas fell into the seats. Lucas closed his eyes and lay back. "I'm bringing an emotional damages lawsuit against the state of Texas." I laughed feebly, but I was uneasy with the lot's silent emptiness. The canyon walls gradually faded into shade as we began the long drive back to the highway. The road seemed to be extending itself to keep us within, making it seem longer than when we had arrived that morning. Dad cursed and slowed the van when we eventually arrived at the departure gate. The gate was secured. It was padlocked shut and a hefty chain stretched across it. There was a warning sign that was reflecting. Due space was shut down. "For help, contact the sheriff's office." "Fantastic," Lucas whispered. "Now we are prisoners." Dad gave him a forehead rub. "Back at the trailhead is a payphone. That will have to do." We therefore drove the 5 miles back after turning around. However, the line was dead when Dad picked up the payphone. The receiver was banged back into the hook by him. No tone on the dial. Things are worthless, damn them. I took my phone out. No assistance. Lucas made the same inspection. We were totally shut off by the canyon. The solitude of the desert pressed in as we exchanged glances. "Now what?" I inquired. Dad responded, "We're going back to the gate. Perhaps there will be a signal nearer the roadway." With headlights sweeping across rock and bush, we hopped back into the van and started slowly down the small paved road. Lucas's voice was sharp as he spoke. "Those headlights behind us, huh?" In my seat, I twisted. On the horizon, rising above it, 2 pairs of headlights gleamed as they rose. As far as I could determine, they were identical to silver sedans. They were traveling slowly, nearly keeping up with us. Dad scowled at what were likely other hikers in the mirror. Lucas fired back at 9 o'clock. Rangers, perhaps. I offered, but it sounded weak. However, the vehicle remained precisely the same distance behind us as we proceeded. They slowed when their father did. They accelerated as he did. Whispering, "Okay, this is officially weird," Lucas said. The sedans had halted far enough back that their headlights were barely visible to us by the time we returned to the barred gate. Muttering to himself, Dad stepped outside to inspect the fence. Uncomfortably, I glanced into the mirrors before the vehicles abruptly turned around. No delay, no hesitation. They simply wheeled back and vanished over the ridge from which we had come. What on earth? I took a breath. Lucas bent over. Where did they go? Dad, his face white but composed, climbed back in. The fences were securely fastened. No way out. Those cars just disappeared, I remarked. Dad suggested that they might have returned to the lot. However, he sounded unconvinced. To make sure, we returned to the parking lot. But as soon as we arrived, it was devoid of anything. Not even dust in the air, not a single car. Lucas had his hands on the seat. They were directly behind us. They were visible to us. I gave a nod. They couldn't have simply vanished. The night weighed heavily on the three of us as we sat there in quiet. Neither of us wanted to acknowledge our fear. At last, Dad said, "We're not remaining here." We made our way back to the gate. The barbed wire had been crudely fixed in one spot, which Dad discovered when walking the fence. He pried it open with trembling hands, allowing the van to pass through. He stopped as we entered the highway to reposition the fence. On the journey back, nobody spoke. On the surface, the rest of the journey went smoothly. We ate cheap camp food, climbed smaller trails, and acted as if nothing had happened. However, each time the three of us fell silent as we passed that section of the highway. It didn't happen again until the final morning, when they were traveling home at first light. The road was vast, level, and deserted. Lucas tensed up next to me while I was still half sleeping. He mumbled, "They're back." I opened my eyes to saw two silver sedans following us in the rearview mirror. They were the same distance away and moving at the same steady rate. My stomach fell. "Dad," I gasped. "I see them," he whispered, his jaw clenched. The sun was blazing crimson across the horizon as we traveled for miles in such manner. In a little village, we finally turned into a gas station. On the highway, the automobiles continued to drive by without stopping. They were gone when we resumed our journey. They were never seen by us again, and none of us can explain it to this day. Before I lost noise, I never imagined that I would miss it. Silence took over my life after my split with Lena Carter. When our nearly 5-year relationship ended, it wasn't disastrous, but sufficiently unsightly. Half-packed boxes, resentful remarks, and the sound of her car's engine fading away down the street. That was the last thing I remembered about us. I persuaded myself that in order to rebuild myself, I needed to be alone. Just me. No roommates, no outside distractions. I therefore signed a lease for a modest one-bedroom home in Garland, Texas, in the fall of last year. There wasn't much to see. A yard that appeared to have been neglected for years, white siding that was peeling from the summer sun, and a chain-link fence that was barely holding itself up. However, it was mine. It was quiet, reasonably priced, and the kind of location I could finally relax in after months of stress. The silence felt lovely at first. When I got home from work at the distribution warehouse, I would sit on the couch with the TV humming in the background, microwave whatever half-decent meal I had in the refrigerator. I would occasionally jog around the block. On occasion, I would simply sit in bed and go through my phone until I fainted. "You're like a hermit," my coworker Caleb Ortiz said to me in the break room of the warehouse one day. His brown hair was peeking out from under his cap as he smiled. He took a bite out of a sandwich. "Whole damn house to yourself, man. And you just sit in there like you're hiding from the world." "Maybe I am," I said with a sigh. I laughed it off. At the time, I felt he was just giving me __, but Caleb's comments would come back to me. "Bro, you're 30, not 70. Go out, meet people. Hell, at least buy a dog. You won't even know if someone is breaking in until it's too late." About 2 months after moving in, on a Tuesday night, work had been long and uneventful. I had eaten leftover spaghetti, jogged a mile, showered, and climbed into bed. I liked privacy, so I kept the blinds closed, and my bedroom window looked out onto the side yard where I had half-heartedly planted a couple of browning shrubs. At midnight, I heard it, and at first, it was faint like the dry crunch of leaves, so I assumed it was the wind or a stray cat. Slow, heavy footsteps became more distinct, so I held my breath and muted my phone. The sound stopped just below my window, and my heart pounded in my ears. I stared at the blinds, half expecting them to be yanked open, but a minute later, the footsteps faded into the darkness, and the following morning, I told myself it was nothing, probably a neighbor's child slicing through the yard. The grass outside the window was pressed down in irregular spots, though, and one of the bushes had been bent, breaking almost in two. I had to shrug it off, but the footsteps returned on Wednesday night, and by Thursday, I was unable to contain them. I said to Caleb at lunch, 2 nights in a row? Yeah, just pacing around, he said, leaning forward and wearing a tired, amused face. It stops at my window. That's not a kid, man. That person is observing you. Have you called the police yet? Hello, I think someone might be strolling around my yard. They'll laugh me off the line. __, that's what they're for. Dude, people don't creep around houses at midnight for fun. I shook my head, wondering what I could possibly say. Maybe they do, I muttered, trying to sound casual, but the uneasiness in his eyes disturbed me more than the footsteps had. On Friday night, it got worse. I had been asleep for maybe an hour when I heard the sound. Slow, purposeful footsteps again, this time circling the house instead of lingering at the window. My throat dried up as I heard the gate creak, followed by more crunching in the backyard. I reached for the baseball bat I had started keeping next to my bed, but fear held me there. The footsteps eventually stopped, but I couldn't get rid of the impression that whoever it was waiting. On Saturday morning, I noticed Mrs. Delgado, my neighbor across the street, watering her plants. She was in her 60s, short, happy, and always waving when I pulled into the driveway. Her voice echoed across the silent street. "Good morning, Daniel." I paused, then approached her. "Hey, Mrs. Delgado, just a quick question. Have you seen anyone hanging around the neighborhood at night?" She asked, frowning. "You mean like walking through yards? Maybe by my place." She eyed me for a bit before saying, "Be careful, Miko." Her lips clenched. "No." "Why? Did something happen?" I faked a giggle. "Probably nothing. Just thought I heard something. Although things have improved in this area, you never know." I thanked her, nodded, and went back inside. And that night, the footsteps came again. I woke up at almost 3 in the morning to a new sound. Not footsteps, but the rattling of my window. I initially thought it was the wind, but then I noticed a blind shift. Someone was attempting to open it, and my body locked, my breath caught in my throat before a hand slid inside through the tiny opening at the bottom, pale, filthy, fingers fumbling. Someone bolted it, and I frantically grabbed my phone, dialing 911 with trembling hands before the police arrived to find the intruder gone. 2 officers searched the yard and discovered footprints in the dirt by the window leading to the back gate. Something inside me snapped, and I let out a scream I didn't know I was capable of. The following day, a clean-shaven, steady-voiced detective in his mid-40s named Mark Riva arrived and gave me a rundown of the basics. "You live alone?" "Yes," he said. "Do you see anyone keeping eye on the house? Are there any cars parked close by? In the neighborhood? Strangers?" He nodded and said, "No, nothing like that. Keep your windows and doors shut. If you can, install cameras. Give them a call right away if they return. Don't delay." I nodded, but it didn't make me feel any safer. The days that followed were a blur. I put security cameras in, strengthened the locks, and kept my phone close at hand, but the fear persisted. Every shadow outside made my heart race, and every creak in the house made me jump. One morning at work, Caleb remarked, "You look like __, man." While sipping, he lowered his voice and said, "Dude, what if it's not random? What if it's someone who knows you?" I said, not sleeping, but the concept persisted in my mind and wouldn't go away. 2 weeks later, I assumed it was over since the footsteps had stopped. There was no rattling or shadows, but one night at around 3 in the morning, I woke up to a lot of silence. I checked the cameras for my phone, but there was nothing there. Then, as I was ready to put it down, the feed froze, and when it cleared, I saw a tall figure in the side yard, still facing the camera. The figure slowly raised a hand, then waved, and the feed cut to I don't know who they were or what they wanted, but I know this. I might not be here to tell you this if I hadn't woken up that first night when the hand slid through the window. I was 10 years old this spring, and my life changed forever. Looking back now, at 22, I can still see every detail of that week as if it happened yesterday. Black. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I packed a bag and left the house the following morning. I haven't been back since. I grew up in a small town in southern Texas called Brookhaven, which isn't the kind of place you'd find on a map unless you were looking closely. A faded highway cut through it, and everything else branched from that one stretch of road. There were 2 gas stations, a diner, a barbershop, and a grocery store that smelled like cardboard and old onions. We didn't have movie theaters or shopping malls, and everyone knew each other's names. We didn't have movie theaters or malls, and life moved more slowly and quietly. It should not have surprised me when she said yes that night, but I wish she had said no. My mom, Rebecca, was the type of woman people looked up to. She raised me alone after my dad left when I was 3 years old, was steady, strong in her faith, and had a habit of taking in strays, both people and animals. She once took in a runaway cousin until his parents found him. Additionally, she took in a family from church for 2 weeks after their house caught fire. My mom picked up the receiver and tucked it under her chin as she wiped her hands on a dish towel. Hello. Oh, Mark. Hi. My Uncle Mark was her younger brother, the type of man who couldn't stay in one place for long, always working odd jobs, living out a trailer just outside town. I was lying on the carpet with a comic book, the ceiling fan clicking above me, when the phone rang on a Wednesday evening. I could tell by her tone that whatever he was saying wasn't casual. My mom chewed her lip, looking at me, and then at the empty guest room down the hall. At the park, a girl. 16, I sat up curious. Mark's voice came faintly through the receiver. Yeah, I didn't know what else to do, Becky. She looks like she's been sleeping rough. I couldn't just leave her there. My mom sighed. All right, but just for the night. She turned to me after she hung up. I don't know, Mark. Bringing someone we don't know into the house. She's just a kid, Mark pressed. Come on, you have that spare room. Just one night. I'll stop by too. Make sure everything's okay. That was all it took. An hour later, I heard the crunch of gravel in the driveway, and Mark's old truck rattled as it came to a stop. I stood by the window, looking through the blinds, and then I saw her. Uncle Mark is bringing someone over, Danny, a girl who doesn't have a place to stay. Be polite, okay? I nodded, but I didn't understand. I was surprised to see that the girl was smaller than I had anticipated, with long black hair hanging in disheveled strands, a faded hoodie that appeared to be 2 sizes too big, and a plastic grocery sack that sagged empty in her hand. Uncle Mark introduced them as they entered the porch, and Lauren's voice was barely audible. Hello, sweetheart. I'm Rebecca, and this is my son, Danny, my mom said politely, and Lauren nodded but avoided eye contact. Come on in. Lauren ate quickly, as if she hadn't eaten in days, and then Mom whispered a thank you and vanished into the guest bedroom without another word. That night, as I lay in bed, I swear I heard the floorboards creak. I peeked out from under the covers and saw her shadow in the hallway. Mom offered to step aside. The moment she crossed the threshold, I felt something shift. Perhaps it was just my imagination, but the air seemed heavier, thicker. I ducked back, heart pounding, thinking it was only a trick of the light. And the following morning, Mom served pancakes as Lauren sat at the table, half face hidden, but with her hair groomed. So, Lauren, do you want us to call someone for you? Mom asked gently. Perhaps your mother. Lauren's fork froze, and I briefly believed she might not respond. Then she said softly, she won't pick up. She kicked me out. She said I did something I didn't. My mother tilted her head. What happened? Lauren's eyes flickered up, guarded and cold. She thinks I slept with her boyfriend, but I didn't. He's the one who tried things. She didn't believe me. Filled the kitchen. I could feel the weight of it, even at 10 o'clock. My mom touched her hand across the table and said, I'm sorry, sweetheart. That's not your fault. Lauren nodded, but said nothing more, and I thought maybe things would improve after that, but they didn't. That afternoon, while I was watching cartoons in the living room, I felt it before I saw it, and I could feel eyes on me. Slowly, I I turned to see Lauren standing in the hallway, staring at me with a fierce, hateful expression instead of one of sadness or fear. I quickly averted my gaze, feeling queasy, but when I looked back, she was still there, her eyes staring into my face. Later, when I went to the kitchen to get some water, I saw her again, peeking around a corner with only her head visible, her eyes dark and unblinking. "Why are you staring at me like that?" I blurted, but she didn't respond, just gave me a small smile and slipped back into the hallway. I didn't tell my mom because I didn't want to start a fight, but before I went to bed that night, I pushed my dresser in front of my door. Uncle Mark returned the next evening, wanting to check in and perhaps help me decide what to do next. So we all sat down to dinner. Halfway through the meal, Lauren remained silent and hardly touched her food when a low growl sounded from her throat. At first, I assumed it was coming from her stomach, but it soon became deeper, louder, and almost animal. Her entire body started to shake, her lips pulled back, and her teeth tightened. "Lauren?" Mom asked in panic, and then she fell out of her chair and thrashed wildly on the floor, screaming in a guttural voice. "Oh my God," Mom whispered, hurrying to her side. "Jesus Christ," Uncle Mark muttered, backing up, and I froze in place, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Plates rattled, my fork clattered to the floor, and Lauren's body twisted unnaturally, her hands clawing at the air, and a growl tore from her throat so loud it vibrated the windows. "In Jesus' name, leave her!" With a shaky yet strong voice, my mother yelled. I pray aloud, quoting scripture. Uncle Mark joined her with wide eyes, and I ran to my room, slammed the door, and pushed my chair under the knob. I could hear everything from inside, including the prayers, screams, and guttural growls. It seemed to go on forever. After 2 hours of hell, there was silence, and I opened my door just enough to see Lauren curled up on the couch. The following morning, my mother woke me up early. Her face was pale and serious. "Danny, get dressed," she said, her eyes opening slowly and locking on me, icy and unblinking. I closed the door again, trembling. "We're having breakfast out. How about Lauren?" I inquired. "Your uncle is taking her back to her mom's today," she said, her lips tensing up. "He slept on the couch last night. We spoke, and we believe she staged it. She's unstable and dangerous." I didn't disagree. Uncle Mark's pickup was in the driveway when we went outside, and I felt a wave of relief. I never saw Lauren again. Weeks turned into months, and no one in town spoke of her. I once asked Uncle Mark what had happened, but he simply shook his head, saying, "Don't worry about it, kid." Lauren climbed in slowly, arms crossed, her face twisted in anger, and she gave me one last look, her glare sharper than ever. Then they drove away. The memories of the growls, the thrashing, the never-ending screaming, and the way they followed and hated me are what haunt me the most, even after 12 years. I was 24 years old this summer. I packed up everything I owned and left Louisiana. My lease in New Orleans had ended, and I had finally made the decision to move across the country to Oregon. In 2010, I had no job lined up, no friends waiting for me, just the hope that I could carve out a better, quieter life away from the hustle and bustle of the Gulf. My belongings were crammed into the back of a 14-foot U-Haul. The cab smelled like old vinyl and gasoline, and the seat belt snorted softly against my shoulder. My only companion was my 2-year-old pit bull, Daisy, who was sprawled across the passenger seat with her head on my thigh, snoring softly. I had printed out MapQuest directions before I left. I was deep in central Texas by the third day, and the highway was long and lonely, with 2 pale lanes running through scrubland and sand. Heat shimmered off the pavement, and I rolled down the windows because the U-Haul's AC barely worked, and the warm wind tangled my hair into knots. Daisy panted with her head out the window, ears flapping, and I hadn't seen a gas station or an exit for hours. Reception was spotty outside the big cities, and I knew I couldn't rely on service through the wide, empty stretches. The gauge was getting closer to empty, and every time it dropped lower, my chest tightened. I've been running for a long time, and I try to figure out 15 m per gallon, maybe less with the truck way down. "Please, God, let there be a town," I muttered under my breath, and Daisy licked her lips and wetted as if she could sense my anxiety. Just as panic struck, I saw a group of buildings up ahead, and relief came so quickly that I burst out laughing. The town appeared small, tiny even, but it had a gas station, and that was all I needed. I pulled into the gas station and filled up, swiping my debit card at the pump. The sign above the building buzzed, half the letters burned out, so it just read MRKT. The asphalt beneath my boots was soft with heat, radiating up through the soles. There were maybe 6 streets in all, the kind of town you'd miss if you blinked. One rusted water tower stood crooked against the horizon. Houses leaned in on cracked foundations, paint peeling, porches sagging. I circled the entire town once, twice, and on my third attempt, sweat pricked at the back of my neck. Not from the heat, but from something else. How could I have been unable to find my way out of a place so small that I could see the highway right there beyond the buildings? It was right in front of me, with wide, pale lanes cutting through nothingness, but every road I tried would loop me back into town. I said out loud, "Okay, this is stupid," and tightened my grip on the wheel. "I'm just tired," I said, and Daisy shifted uneasily next to me, her ears flicking. Finally, I got frustrated and pulled back into the gas station lot, thinking maybe someone could help me find my way. The interior smelled slightly of dust and grease, and there was a rack of old magazines leaning against the counter. A thin man with lank black hair that fell over his face sat with his elbows on the counter, hunching over a magazine, his hands turning the pages without interest. I said, "Excuse me," but he didn't look up. "Sorry, I just fueled up. I'm trying to get back onto the interstate. Could you tell me the way?" He tilted his head slowly, but not meeting my eyes, and his voice sounded flat, as if he had used the same line too often. He shrugged, eyes still on the magazine. "Take County Road 9 west for about 17 miles. You'll see signs for the highway there." I blinked. 17 miles? That doesn't make sense. I just turned off the highway less than a quarter of a mile back. The road curves around. The only way back. His tone unnerved me. He waved one hand toward the door, dismissing me, and I felt my heart pounding so hard I thought he might hear it. A tremor started in my hands and worked its way up my arms. And when I stepped outside into the sunlight, I gasped as if I'd been holding my breath. Suddenly, my throat closed up and tears poured down my face without warning. It wasn't even annoyed, it was indifferent, as if I wasn't even worth the effort of lying properly. There was no one else in this town, no second store, no diner, just a few houses, the station, and the endless desert pressing in. I wiped my eyes and told myself that I would just keep going around until I found a right turnoff, because no matter how long it took, I wasn't going 17 miles down some back road into nothing. Then an old red pickup, which appeared to have survived 2 wars and possibly lost both, and had more rust than metal, rattled into the lot, and a broad man got out, wearing a flannel shirt, work boots. I didn't think, so I just jumped out of my U-Haul and walked toward him. "Excuse me, sir." My voice cracked from the tears I just fought back. He turned, and the first thing I saw were his eyes, clear and steady, the kind that looked like that of someone's father or uncle. "Yeah, Mom." His face was ruddy, creased from sun and wind. I can see it, but I keep missing the turn. His brows pulled together, concern etching deep lines across his forehead. "You look like you've been running in circles. You okay? Just tired and frustrated." "Well, don't worry. It happens more than you'd think." That easy Texas drawl, gentle but grounded. I know this sounds silly, but I can't seem to find my way back onto the interstate. I forced a shaky laugh. The concrete thing you'd think was nothing is a small tunnel underpass just east of here. Immediately after that, there's a sharp hairpin beneath the ramp, which people always miss. I should put a damn sign up. Relief washed over me, but suspicion pulled at me as well. "How far is it?" "Miles, I mean." He laughed. "Miles? Hell, it ain't even." My stomach dropped, but the man inside told me that it was 17 miles on County Road 9. His face hardened, his mouth pressed into a thin line. "Who told you that?" The clerk inside, tall, thin, dark-haired, stared at me for a long time before continuing, his voice quieter now. "A quarter mile. You could throw a rock and hit it. You probably passed it 3 times already." I shook my head and said, "What's out there on that road?" "Nothing good. It ends at a stretch of trailers and junk heaps. The same families lived out there for years. Meth, alcohol, you name it. Trouble, all of them. People around here look away. Is he one of them? Daisy whimpered softly behind me in the cab. Yes, he is, I said, and the man gave me a single nod. You were right to avoid that path. The scorching wind pulled at my hair as we stood in quiet for a while until I finally murmured, "What do you think would have happened if I had?" I will always remember the weight behind his eyes as they met mine. He walked me back toward my truck, pointed again toward the hidden underpass, and clapped a heavy hand on the side of the U-Haul. Stick close to the highway. Trust your gut. You'll be fine. I climbed back in, Daisy pressing against me protectively. Less than a minute later, I found a narrow concrete tunnel, and beyond it, just as he'd said, was the curved turnoff to the interstate. Don't ask questions you don't want answered, ma'am. Just be grateful you didn't find out. But sometimes instinct isn't paranoia, it's survival. Sometimes guardian angels don't wear wings. Sometimes they wear flannel and drive rusty red pickups. I never got his name, but to me, he'll always be Texas. I looked in the rearview mirror as I merged back onto the open road. The small town was already disappearing into the desert haze, swallowed by heat and distance. I don't know what was waiting for me 17 miles down that back road, and I never want to. Roommates in college, a girlfriend for 4 years, and later shared apartments with friends when I couldn't quite pay the rent on my own had all been close by for the majority of my adult life. Noise had been my constant companion. Muffled voices through thin walls, footsteps overhead, and late-night laughter drifting through the vents. I used to complain about it, telling myself that I wanted independence, space, and silence. But 6 months before everything happened, I signed a lease on a small one-story house on the outskirts of Denton, Texas. It was not a particularly impressive place, with white paint peeling in places, a roof that sagged slightly on one corner, and a patchy front yard with weeds growing between cracks in the concrete walkway, all surrounded by a rusted chain-link fence. Its gates squealing whenever it opened, but the rent was reasonable, and for the first time I had a driveway of my own, a porch light to leave on when I arrived home late, and the freedom to close a door without hearing someone else's life seeping into mine. The neighborhood was quiet, primarily older couples and families who kept to themselves, and they waved courteously when I passed, but didn't linger. After the chaos of the previous 2 years, that quiet felt like salvation. On weekends, you'd hear lawnmowers or the faint buzz of children's bikes on the street, but evenings were still almost unnaturally so. The years before the move had been difficult. My father died of a heart attack when I was 25, and I had been working a dead-end job at a logistics warehouse in Dallas. After that, I spiraled out of control, staying too long with a woman I shouldn't have, drinking too much, and ceasing to answer friend calls. By the time that relationship ended spectacularly, I was broke, heartbroken, and I felt like a failure back in my childhood room at my mother's house. So when I managed to save up enough money to move again, I made a promise to myself that this time would be different. I would have a quiet house, no roommates, and a chance to start over without having to deal with other people's drama. I told myself that I loved the house during the first few weeks there. I would come home from work, pull into the driveway, and sit in the car for a minute staring at the porch light glowing against the twilight. It was mine, just mine, but nights were difficult. I would listen to every sound while I lay in bed, including the faint scratch of tree branches brushing the roof and the groan of the wood frame shifting with the wind. I once thought I heard footsteps in the backyard, but when I peeked out the blinds, I saw nothing. I laughed it off when I told my friend Marcus over the phone. "It's just you being jumpy," he said. "You're not used to the quiet. You've always had people around. That's most likely it." However, I wasn't entirely sure. In late April, it was a Friday morning. When the knock came, the windows were already adhering to the humid air. I was waiting for the coffee pot to finish brewing in the kitchen, barefoot. I dropped coffee grounds on the counter when I was so violently shaken by the harsh rap on the front door. No one ever showed up at the house without warning. Typically, deliveries took place in the afternoon that I put the filter down and took my time making my way to the front door. Through the foggy peephole, I caught a glimpse of an unfamiliar man in his mid-40s, possibly sporting an old baseball cap and a disheveled beard. He was wearing an old flannel shirt that appeared to have seen better days. He was carrying a clipboard in one hand and a toolbox in the other. After a moment of hesitation, I left the chain lock in place and cracked the door open a few inches. I said, "Can I help you?" The man flashed a short smile, but it was not sincere. "Good morning." The previous owner indicated that there might be a problem beneath the sink, so they came to examine the pipes. I felt sick to my stomach. My landlord, Karen Lopez, was very thorough in her correspondence. She reminded me to mow the grass twice in a single week by SMS. She would never have forgotten to inform me about plumbing problems. I said, "I think you have the wrong house," with caution. He gave a head shake. "This is the correct one, no doubt about it." I felt my heart race when he said, "He told me to stop by today." I said, "What is the name of my landlord?" He froze for a little moment, but it was enough. "Then Thompson, I guess." That was far from it. I apologized as I began to shut the door. "This is not where you should be." Before I could completely close it, his hand sprang out and grabbed the door's edge. His voice was sharper now as he said, "Look, miss, all I'm doing is my job." My heart pounded. In an attempt to get my landlord to back off, I snapped, "I'm calling to check." Rather, his eyes narrowed as his grip tightened. He whispered softly, "You don't have to do that. Let me in, please. I'll be gone in 10 minutes. An adrenaline rush occurred. Using all of my weight, I slammed the door, freed his hand, and locked it. I couldn't make out what he was yelling as he banged on the door. As I struggled for my phone, my hand shook. 911. "What emergency do you have?" "A man is standing at my door." I let out a gasp. He made an effort to get inside. Although he claims to be a plumber, he is not. I was instructed by the dispatcher to remain on the line. Every thump of his punch echoed in my chest as I put my back to the door. He had left by the time the police showed up. They took my statement, walked the property, and discovered nothing but a cigarette butt by the driveway and muddy footsteps heading toward the street. It was over, I told myself. A random jerk who would go away. However, it was around 1 a.m. 2 nights later. I discovered how mistaken I was that I was looking through my phone while I lay in bed. The street lamp's orange hue was reflected through the slightly damaged slats. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. I initially assumed it was merely waving trees, but then I noticed the same figure standing outside the window of my bedroom. My body became immobile. My throat became parched. He was so close that I could see his eyes glinting and his chest rising and falling as he looked directly at me. With shaking hands, I fumbled for my phone and dialed 911. "He's here," I hurriedly whispered. The dispatcher instructed me to remain composed, be silent, and remain on the line, but I was unable to take my eyes off the screen. The man from before, he's outside my window. He stood there, seemingly waiting, without moving or blinking. Only when the sirens were getting closer did he turn and sneak into the shadows. The officers looked about, but they couldn't find anything. Only more tracks in the mud and new cigarette butts at the fence. Then it was obvious. He hadn't simply tripped out upon my home. He had been observing. The days that followed blended into one another. I jumped at every sound while I slept. I did not raise the blinds. I moved from room to room with a kitchen knife in tow. Then I got a text from my landlord, Karen. "Last week, did you let the plumber in?" He claimed to have visited, but was unable to enter. I went cold. "Which plumber?" I returned the type. I was not informed about one. She called right away. Greer is his name. The older man stated that he had a Friday appointment. He told me that no one answered when he knocked. I felt chilled. "Karen," I muttered, "that man attempted to enter my home. This is the second time the police have come here. On the line, there was quiet. Then, hardly perceptible. Good. Oh, good. He was apprehended a week later. He broke into the home of another woman a few streets away, so it wasn't me. She contacted the cops and fled through the back door. That evening, they took him into custody. Clifford Ray was his name. The plumber wasn't him. He was nothing more than a predator who has been preying on ladies who were living alone for a number of counties. Stalking, breaking and entering, and assault charges. I remember what a cop told me when he gave me an update. "It's fortunate that you made the call at that time. Until someone forces him to stop, he keeps going." A month later, I moved out. I was unable to stay. I left that small house behind and loaded my things into a U-Haul. As if to mock me, the porch light is still shining in the sunshine. But it didn't stop when they left that I still check all the windows and locks in my new apartment across town every night. I have a knife on my bedside table. Shadows in the corner of my eye make me jump. It was meant to be liberating to live alone. Rather, it's like waiting for the next stranger at the window, the next shadow, or the next knock. It is unlikely that I will ever feel secure again. My first serious fear occurred when I was 15 years old. The sort of fright you experience from a jump scare in a horror film or from a haunted house at a carnival, that I'm referring to the kind that lingers for years. The kind that causes you to question your level of safety in your own home. For background, I was raised in a small northern Ohio town. It was the sort of town where people waved to one another even though they didn't know one another well. Nothing much ever happened, and where Friday night football games closed the main thoroughfare. By the time this occurred, my parents had been in the same home for almost 20 years. Situated on around 2 acres of land, the ranch home had a single story and a long gravel driveway that led to the road. By this time, my younger sister, Maddie, spent much of her time at sleepovers with her friends, while my oldest brother, Tyler, had already departed for college. I was the quiet kid in the middle. I liked being alone myself, playing video games, and staying up late. I didn't object when my parents informed me that they would be spending the weekend with my aunt in Cincinnati. Before the entire COVID lockdown situation began, it was winter, and I recall being a little thrilled to be alone in the house. For pizza, my dad left me a 20 on the counter. With that "don't burn the house down" face, my mother gave me a hug, and they vanished after that. The entire weekend was ahead of me. Silence, me and my computer. It was a typical first night. Playing StarCraft 2, drinking Dr. Pepper, and half-eating a bag of Doritos till my eyes burned. I stayed up until nearly 2 in the morning. The following day, I slept in, relaxed, and went through the same routine. But everything happened on that second night. It was present point 11:30 p.m., and I was in my room, completely engrossed in my game, with the lights down and my headphones on. With a single huge window overlooking the driveway, my room was located at the front of the house. The shades were drawn, yet through the tiny slats a dim glimmer came from the porch light. The doorbell rang at that moment. Twice, not just once. Ding dong, ding dong. I almost spilled drink on my keyboard because I flinched so forcefully, and no one has ever visited our home this late. I put my game on hold, took off my headphone, and sat there for a moment. My initial assumption was that either my parents had returned or Maddie had been dropped off early. However, there were no missed calls or texts when I looked at my phone. Once more, the doorbell rang. "Okay," I said quietly as I got to my feet. I wasn't a moron. I was indoctrinated by my parents from an early age. If you're at home by yourself, never open the door. Not without knowing who anyway. Yes, it was... "Who is it?" I moved to the front door and yelled. There was a pause. "Hi, dear. I just need some help." A woman's delicate voice then came through the door. She sounded elderly, possibly in her late 60s or early 70s. I wanted to feel relieved for some reason. My instinct wasn't correct, but it wasn't like a vengeful man beating on the door. I took a quick look through the door's little light glass. An elderly woman in a big coat stood there grinning at the door with her silver hair pulled back. Even though she appeared regular, there was something about her smile that made my stomach turn. It wasn't hot. It was resolved. I kept the main entrance closed and cracked the storm door. "Am I able to assist you?" Her head was cocked. "I must use my phone. Could I enter?" All of my warning signs went off. "I apologize." I answered hastily. I can't let outsiders in. However, the nearby petrol station ought to remain operational. They'll be carrying a phone. Her tone shifted, but her smile remained fixed. "You're a pretty impolite young man. You refuse to even open your door when an elderly woman asks for assistance." I apologized again. "House rules, that's all." The door was already being pushed shut by my hand. She remained still, not even blinking. That unwavering smile persisted, and my heart began to race for the first time that evening. I took a deep breath and tried to shrug it off as the door finally snapped shut. Most likely a bewildered elderly woman who got lost somewhere. That's all. I returned to my chamber. Attempted to return to my game before the tapping started. I initially believed it to be a tree branch, but there were no trees near my window that might scrape against it. continued to clink. Glass and metal. I stared at the drawn blinds as I froze in my chair. I felt vulnerable because my room was the only one in the home with a light on. I couldn't see whoever was out there, but they could see me. Not at all. I sprang up so quickly that my chair almost toppled over as I whispered. I switched off my screen, reached for my phone, then sneaked out into the corridor. I could hear the pounding of my heart in my ears. For a while, I sat in the dim living room, jumping at every sound in the house. Then, 5 or 6 times a row, the doorbell rang once more. Dancing, dancing, dancing. I mumbled, holding a throw pillow as if it would do anything along with Jesus Christ. The ringing ceased. I heard another sound and nearly told myself to simply wait it out. The driveway's subtle crunch of gravel. Someone leaving. I compulsively peered out the side window. Standing on the porch was a man. Wearing trousers, a black jacket, and a baseball cap pulled down, he appeared to be in his mid-30s. When he noticed me peeking out, he lifted his hands. Through the glass, he murmured, "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you. Have you seen my mother? She's older, rather short, and has gray hair. She suffers from dementia. Someone claimed to have seen her come this way after she walked off." My heart fell. The elderly lady. I kept the storm door closed and said, "She came here earlier." He grinned and his shoulders loosened. "God be praised." Has she entered the house? "No," I said hastily. He scowled a little. "Would it be okay if I entered and took a look around? Perhaps she went to the rear." Something about his questioning style. Too easy, as if he thought I would simply open up. Made me feel anxious again. I'm unable to admit anyone. "House rules," I said again, my voice already trembling. However, I believe she turned around. "You can look there." He grinned back. "Thank you, child. Thank you." He walked down the stairs after turning. I waited for him to vanish into the night. He wasn't there when I rushed to the back window to check whether he had changed his mind. The woman wasn't either. There was nobody in the yard. When I eventually went to bed that evening is a mystery to me. But I buried myself under the covers and left the TV on, acting like I was 5 years old again. Sleep arrived, I in patches, thin and restless, till I heard that same clinking sound when I woke up. Continue to clink. With a parched throat, I sat up and faced the window. I slowly reached over and slightly raised the blind so I could see what was outside. My blood became icy. The elderly woman had that same unwavering smile on her face as she stood inches from the window. She had a kitchen knife in her hand and was striking its point on the window. Continue to clink. My entire body shook as I lurched back after dropping the blind. Over and over, the doorbell rang. There's a thumping now. I didn't respond. I remained motionless. I waited while snuggled up on the bed. Eventually, everything came to a halt. I felt as though I had run a marathon in my sleep when the light eventually rose. I told my dad everything over the phone as soon as I woke up. He added firmly, "You were wise not to open that door. They seemed to be attempting to enter. Do you believe they had a true relationship?" I inquired. Dad was silent for a while. "Is it important? They want entry. All you need to know is that." I knew in my heart that he was correct. So I hung up feeling both relieved and nauseous. It had all been too planned, too calculated, whether or not she had dementia and whether or not that man was her son. I will always remember the sound of the knife. That metal tapping on a piece of glass. Continue to clink. Years have passed since that night, yet the paranoia hasn't completely subsided. Before going to bed, I still check my locks 3 times. Even still, when the doorbell rings after dark, I jump. And it nearly happened once more last week. I was keeping an eye on Milo, a small Palsky owned by my friend Derek. Milo started barking maniacally at the rear door about midnight. I walked over irritated, assuming he wanted to go out, but I froze when I was close. The handle on the door was rattling. From the outside, someone was attempting to open it. I could see a man staring directly at me through the screen. Scrambled beard, dirty clothes, mid-50s. "Hey," he said, his teeth yellowed. "Is Melissa present?" Derek's younger sister is named Melissa. Her age is 22. I felt sick to my stomach. "Here, no one with that name resides. You must go." He cocked his head. "Are you certain?" I tried to sound steady. "Yes, and there are cameras all around this location. Go now. It seems to do the trick." He complained, took a step back, and vanished into the night. Later, when Darrera questioned his sister, she vowed that she had never seen him before. It helped me come to a realization. Individuals like that don't simply disappear. All it takes is one mistake, and they search for openings, hesitations, and moments of trust. I never imagined that I would experience it. Since people frequently discuss these events as if they are urban legends and only happen to other people, that is the first thing I must state. Those who were careless, unlucky, and inattentive. However, I was in San Antonio 2 summers ago and discovered myself at the risk of getting captured. And the only reason I'm still here to tell it is that before my brain completely caught up, some part of me, some residual training, some instinct I didn't even realize I still had, kicked in. I was 24 at the time. By no means was I the type of person you would anticipate being targeted. My name is Rachel Quinn. I used to tell myself that, anyway. On a good day, I'm around 53. However, I've always had a certain attitude about me. The attitude that individuals refer to as "don't mess with me." I held on to. Back then, I colored my hair a bright copper red and cropped it short. Everywhere I went, I rode my bike. I had left the military to complete my education after a brief stint. Those I believed provided me an advantage. It turns out that none of that matters to those who want to take women off the street. I had been restless in the house on this sweltering Saturday in July. I was left alone in the living room, fidgeting while my 2 housemates were both working double shifts. Never quite keeping up with the heat, the air conditioner grumbled and sputtered that I muttered, "Damn, Texas summers," and tossed my phone onto the couch. I was trying to quit smoking at the time, but the stress of being unemployed for 3 weeks was getting to me. The urge struck hard, so I rode my bike down to Smoke Haven, a small store about 3 miles away. It wasn't in the best part of town, Sibra Road, near a strip of dilapidated auto shops and empty lots. But I'd been there before and never had any problems, so I locked the door, put on my backpack, and wheeled my bike down the stairs. The streets shimmered in the heat, and the sound of cycas filled the air like a warning I ignored. I stopped at a crosswalk roughly halfway through. I heard it there, waiting for the light to turn. "Hey, mama." I turned my head slightly as a sharp, overly eager voice cut through the traffic noise. To my right, a white van idling by the curb had no decals or logos, just flat white paint that had yellowed in the sun. It was the type of van that everyone jokes about. Free candy. Don't go near it. However, in that moment, I felt my chest tighten in a way I hadn't before. 2 Hispanic men, perhaps in their mid-30s, were inside. One leaned toward the cracked passenger window, smiling, and the other sat back, but I could feel his eyes on me. "Where are you going, Red?" The passenger called out in a taunting song, and I ignored him, focusing on the crosswalk light. "Damn, look at her." The driver laughed, talking to his friend in Spanish, but I only heard a few of his words that we like it. "We're gonna get you, girl. You're next. La próxima." The blonde one. The next one. My jaw tightened. I flipped them off without looking. "Oh, attitude." The passenger crowed. The street ahead narrowed past an empty lot with weeds taller than me, and on the other side was a brick wall, and beyond that was a jerk. The light turned green, and I pedaled hard, pushing away from them. My heart beat a little faster, but I told myself it was just trash talk, just creeps. Even so, there was something in their tone that wasn't lust, not the usual disgusting commentary, but excitement, as if they were waiting for something dead-end alley where dumpsters used to be. They had parked the van at the mouth of the alley, preventing me from going straight. The passenger door cracked open. "Come on, baby. Quick shortcut," the driver yelled, beaming broadly. As I hurried forward, I heard the sudden rev of an engine. The van sped ahead, swung in front of me, and screeched to a stop. I froze, bike tires squealing. Every warning sign in my body went off, away immediately. I just reacted without thinking. I swerved my bike sharply to the left, sped across the street against the light, and almost collided with the bumper of a vehicle that honked so loudly it shook my bones, rather than heading for the alley. I pedaled furiously. I looked back to see the vehicle had pulled into the alley and was waiting. However, there was a problem. The front chairs were empty now. I saw activity through the tinted glass. Moving shadows in the rear. I felt sick to my stomach. They weren't only bothering me. They had relocated to the rear entrances. They were anticipating dragging me in. The van's engine roared once again as I crossed the crossing. Black arcs appeared on the asphalt as the tires squealed. Behind me, they veered into the lane as they exited the alley. With my legs burning and my eyes hurting from perspiration, I cut down a side street while one voice within yelled, "Faster, faster." I was rubbernecking with my heart in my throat when I noticed something new. A magnet decal that read San Antonio Window Repair was slapped onto the side of the van. It was too clean and generic, as if it had been printed on a home computer that morning. Somehow, I managed to make it to the shop, dropped my bike by the rack, and hurried inside, almost slamming the glass door behind me. As I staggered to the counter, the bell jingled, and the cashier, a man called Luis, with whom I had spoken a few times, glanced up from his phone and exclaimed, "There's a van." "Damn, Rachel, you look like you saw a ghost," he remarked. "Two guys tried to cut me off." I gasped, my chest quivering. Louise scowled as she walked around the counter. "Block me? Where?" "Out there. White van." The van rolled slowly past the shop's front windows before I could continue. Louise spotted it, his face drained of color. "Stay inside," he urged firmly, locking the door before picking up his phone and calling the police. "No plats." I could see a window repair sign. They tried out arrived 20 minutes after the van had vanished, and I made a statement, unsteady, with hands shaking so much I had to grab my legs to stay motionless. The officer, a woman in her 40s with weary eyes, listened intently. I said, "What you're describing, ma'am, matches reports we've had," she added. "They try to entice women near alleys or vacant lots, change plates, and use phony business magnets. You made the proper decision by continuing." I took a deep breath. "Trafficking, then?" I could tell everything from her quiet, "A acquaintance from Terry," shook his head when I told him the story later. "Rachel," he muttered. "Back home, this is a common occurrence. Mexico is no longer the only country. And they're here. There is little difference between packed streets and daylight. They just require 7 seconds. 7 seconds. It would have only required that. If I hadn't swerved, I would have given it more thought than I acknowledged. If I had taken my time. If I had ever considered the possibility that I was exaggerating. Now I live alone. Like clockwork, I shut the doors once my housemates left. Although I still ride my bike, I never go near the chorus section. They're still out there, waiting for the next girl who believes it won't happen to her. So every time I pass a white van, I notice myself rubbernecking, looking for movement behind the seats. Before I started living alone, I had never given much notice to how quiet a house could feel. Nathan Cole is my name. I am 29 years old, and I work for a mid-size IT business as a software developer. I purchased a modest 2-bedroom home on the outskirts of Round Rock, Texas, which is just north of Austin, approximately a year ago. It was the right thing to do, I assure myself. A good investment in a pleasant neighborhood that is both conveniently near to the city and far enough away to provide some peace and quiet. To be honest, I was partially trying to prove something to myself. I shared walls, thin apartment doors, roommates, and the incessant hum of other people's lives for years. I thought it was time after Derek, my previous roommate, got married and moved out that I achieved my goals of independence and a place of my own. However, no one can explain the difference that silence feels when you're alone. Silence in an apartment has texture. The sounds of footsteps upstairs, doors shutting, and a neighbor's hushed voice shouting at a game on TV are still audible. Every creak in the floorboards and every groan of shifting would sound like a whisper intended only for you when you're alone in a house, because the quiet is thicker and unbroken. I liked it at first. I was able to concentrate on my task without interruption. In any case, I work late most evenings. I developed a pattern that included coding into the early hours, responding to messages from clients in various time zones, pushing updates, coffee, and bright monitors. However, the distinction between tranquil and unnerving is not always clear. I also discovered that a line can disappear in an instant. It was late October, a Thursday evening. The air seems crisp but not frigid, and the scent of dry leaves clings to the breeze on one of those cool Texas evenings. Hours have been spent working on a client project that required me to finish a back-end update on my laptop. Coffee mugs were all over my dining table, and they were sticky notes, as well as a previously unopened takeout carton. It was just after midnight when I shut off my laptop. Tired but restless, I experienced that wired fatigue. I got up from the table, sat down on my living room couch, and flipped on Netflix. Something light. I wasn't listening to some weird documentary. I heard at that point. There's a knock. It wasn't SHY-IT, was crisp, deliberate, loud enough to cut through the calm. I went cold. My body responded before my head did, causing my skin to prickle and my heart to pound. At midnight, no one knocks on my door. Not neighbors, not pals. The final notification from work was shining on my phone, which was resting on the coffee table. I listened as I gently leaned forward. Perhaps it was my imagination. Perhaps it was only the house move. Then it happened once more. The wood thudded 3 times. I muttered to myself, shit. I rose gingerly. The bluish TV screen was the only source of light in the dim living room. At the far end of the room, the entrance door sat in shadow. My steps seemed too loud on the wood floor as I approached. My lifeline was the peephole. I breathed shallowly and pressed my eye against it. On my doorstep, a man was standing. He had a scruffy beard, was of average height, had a gray hoodie with the hood halfway up, and appeared to be in his mid to late 30s or early 40s. His jeans weren't brand new, but they weren't dirty either. He wasn't particularly unkempt, and he wasn't wobbling intoxicated, but something about him seemed off. At first, he didn't look at the door. His hands were deep in his hoodie pocket, his shoulders were slightly bent, and his head was cocked downward. I gritted my teeth and pushed my voice out. The man's head jolted up, revealing his face to me for the first time. Who is it? He smiled at me weakly, without making eye contact. I'm sorry to bother you, guy. A few blocks away, my automobile broke down. Would it be possible for me to contact for assistance using your phone? He spoke in a courteous but strained tone. The remarks sounded practiced, perhaps too cautious. My intuition spoke out to me. I didn't do anything or move. With caution, I said, I don't think I can help you. Down the way is a gas station, 0.5 minutes, perhaps. They'll be carrying a phone. The man remained unflinching. His smile faded as he stood there. After a pause, he continued, please, in a softer tone. I've spent some time walking. I don't feel well. I only have one call to make. I'm just calling, not requesting a ride. He sounded desperate as he spoke. Desperation, however, can be a performance. Instead of going to the petrol station, why come to my house? He would have passed a dozen houses before mine, so why not knock? Keeping the lock between us, I gripped the door knob more tightly. Sorry, but I am unable to assist you. Check out the station across the street. There was silence for a long moment. Then, very silently, I heard him mutter, just let me in, please. I felt sick to my stomach. The doorknob shook abruptly, first lightly, and then more forcefully. My heartbeat slammed in my ears as I immediately leaped back. Hey, stop, I yelled, my voice breaking. Through the thin wood, I could hear his breathing now, heavy and raspy. He threw his weight against the door, causing it to jolt. The lock groaned metallically as it strained. He snarled, open the door, raw as louder this time. With my head whirling, I staggered backward. I rushed and grabbed my phone, my hands shaking so much that I almost lost it. My phone. Where the hell was my phone? Coffee table. Living room. 911. Make a call. Give us a call now. I was already whispering quickly when the operator answered. Someone is attempting to enter my home. .my front door is where he is. He's going all out. I need police, please. Pineview Lane, house number 412, Round Rock. Mid-sentence, the door med once more. Wood shutters. Remain composed, sir. There will be officers soon. Don't open the door. Are there any firearms in your home? Kitchen knife, indeed. I stumbled. A knife is in my possession. Hold on to the line. If you can, get somewhere secure. After running into the kitchen, I opened a drawer and put my sweaty palm around my largest chef's knife. I saw a pallid, wild-eyed reflection of myself in the steel. The hammering persisted, erratic but intense. Like a gunshot, each slam reverberated through the walls. Come on in. Let me in, Please, his voice had lost its pretense and was now raspy. My throat felt like it was locked, and I wanted to shout back. Then another voice broke through the confusion. What on earth are you doing? It came from across the street outdoors. Walter Briggs, a former Army veteran in his late 60s, was standing in sweatpants on his doorstep. A beam from a flashlight pierced the darkness. At my door, the man froze. Walter growled, "Hey, get out of his house before I call the police myself." There was a thick pause, followed by quick steps, retreating across my porch, and the crunch of gravel as he ran down the street. I fell against the kitchen counter, the knife falling to the floor. The dispatcher was still talking on the phone. "Sir, are you safe? Units are almost there." At first, I was unable to respond. A few minutes later, my chest was heaving and my eyes were stinging from the red and blue lights that flashed through my front window. Two officers knocked, introduced themselves, and I unlocked the door with trembling hands and weak knees. They found him hiding in a house a few doors down in the backyard, with a knife in his hoodie pocket. One of the officers, a woman named Deputy Ramirez, looked me in the eye and said, "You did the right thing. It would have turned out differently if you had opened the door." I felt nauseous from the adrenaline rush. I sat with the police in my living room as they took my statement. Walter, stopping by to check on me. "You all right, son?" "I suppose so," I muttered, and he simply nodded. "Thanks to you. Keep your doors locked at all times." "I couldn't sleep that night," he inquired, his rough voice quieter than usual. "I installed cameras, new locks, and motion lights since then, but the truth is that no hardware can erase the memory. I still tense up whenever someone knocks because I now know that sometimes danger doesn't break in. Sometimes it just knocks smiling, waiting for you to let it inside. I never thought I'd be the type of person to scare myself out of my own confidence. But that's exactly what happened the winter I stayed alone on my family's property in East Texas back in February of 2014. I was 24 at the time when I stayed alone at my family's house. After graduating from college, I was working as a junior communications associate for a mid-sized firm in Houston. The work wasn't glamorous. It was press releases, corporate newsletters, and all the dull stuff that marketing teams eat up, but it was steady, and I had convinced myself that I was moving up the ladder to something better. That weekend, I was given the task of writing a lengthy press release for one of our clients, a company I couldn't care less about. So I decided to make a retreat out of it rather than cooping myself up in my small apartment near the Loop. My grandparents own a large plot of land near Lufkin, deep in the pine woods, so it wasn't exactly wilderness. The place had always felt different, quiet in a way that pressed against your ears, heavy with the kind of silence you don't get in the city. I spent many weekends there as a child, hosting family reunions, grilling out, and letting cousins run wild. In high school, I would take friends out there for poker games, camping trips, or just a place to drink where no one cared. The appeal was that I had never once stayed there alone, just me, my laptop, and the trees and no roommates or city noise. My grandfather, Henry Mercer, had a low, gruff voice that always sounded like he was halfway into a story. "By yourself?" he asked. "Yeah, just me." I called him the night before I left, saying, "Granddad, do you mind if I crash out the property this weekend? I'll be working on something. Figured it'd be good to get out of town. You're an adult, and you know how to turn on the water in the breaker?" "Yes, sir. I've done it many times." "You have the key?" "Yes." Another pause, then a quieter one. "You know where I keep the Henry, don't you?" We didn't stay after that. "Granddad, nothing's going to happen. It's East Texas, not Afghanistan." That's what people say until something happens. I laughed, taken off guard. "The rifle." "Yeah, I know. In the cabinet by the fireplace." "That's right. Keep it close just in case." The property was large, hundreds of acres, and the road thinned and the sky opened once I got out past Conroe. The sun bled orange into the horizon, casting long shadows across fields. And by the time I reached the gravel road that led to our gate, it was dusk. He told me to call if I needed anything, and I promised I would, but his hesitation seemed to indicate that he didn't trust the idea of me staying alone stuck in my head. I left Houston at 4:30 p.m. on Friday, with my laptop bag on the passenger seat and a duffel in the back. I parked outside, gravel crunching beneath my tires, and let myself in. The air smelled faintly of cedar and dust, and everything was as I remembered. The leather furniture, the mounted deer heads, the large stone fireplace. My grandfather had built the house in the center of it, using money from oil leases, and it was more like a lodge than a cabin, with 12 bedrooms, a wraparound porch, high ceilings, and too much for one family. It was the kind of house that looked like it belonged in a magazine, but it always felt a little too empty. I lugged my belongings upstairs, selecting the master bedroom, and threw everything on the king-size bed, took out my laptop, opened the blank Word document, stared at the blinking cursor for 30 seconds, and closed it. Tomorrow, I thought to myself, tonight I walk. I had walked the 3.5-mile perimeter trail around the property dozens of times with cousins and friends, but it was a completely different experience to do it alone. The night was dark, and the woods in East Texas are dense, so I brought a flashlight, and it was cold but peaceful at first, with the trees pressed close, their branches rattling in the breeze, crickets chirping, and the faint band of the Milky Way cutting across the sky. I kept my flashlight off to allow my eyes to adjust, and about halfway through, I made the decision to cut straight back toward the house. Instead of the rifle, I grabbed a 5-foot wooden dowel I kept in the back of my car from an old martial arts class. My reasoning was straightforward. Better to have a stick than to accidentally shoot myself with a gun I hardly knew how to use. I was familiar enough with the terrain to be able to navigate it, but the brush was thicker than I had anticipated, so I had to switch on the flashlight before I could see it. About 30 yards ahead, it appeared to be a pile of clothes thrown in the dirt. I angled the beam in its direction, bewildered, and the light caught fabric, pale against the dark leaves, before the pile moved, jerking upright, human-shaped, and running deeper into the woods. I froze, my heart pounding so hard it hurt my chest. Every nerve in my body was energized by adrenaline, and my arms were tingling. "Hey!" I shouted, though my voice cracked, sounding weaker than I intended. "Who's out there?" I chastised myself for the first time for forgetting my phone when I heard smashing footsteps retreating through the brush. And to make matters worse, those footsteps were aimed toward the house. It was on the bed upstairs, useless to me out here. My flashlight shook in my hand, and I thought of every possible scenario. A thief, a drifter, some lunatic hiding out here, and if something happened, no one would even know I was missing until Monday. I made myself keep going, slicing through the trees as fast as I could without tripping, and every snapping twig behind me sounded like a pursuit. By the time I made it through the trees, the house was in front of me. Its porch light, the front door, was cracked open, and I couldn't remember if I'd locked it before leaving or even if I had closed it. My throat tightened, and I clutched the wooden dowel like a baseball bat and slithered forward. As soon as I pushed the door open, a high-pitched, jagged, inhuman shriek split the air. I was breathing so hard that I almost gagged. I stumbled backward, almost dropping my stick as it tore through the living room, echoing against the high ceilings. My mind went blank. Fight, flight, freeze all at once. I then ran straight upstairs, 2 steps at a time, slamming the door of the master bedroom behind me. From right below me, another scream erupted, this one lower, strangled, as if choked. My hands fumbled with my phone. I ran into the bathroom, locked the door, and squatted in the shower, frantically dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The dispatcher's cool voice was a strange contrast to the jumble of my mind. I tried to explain, but I was rambling. Someone inside was yelling, "I'm alone. Hurry up, please." She answered, "Stay on the line." 20 minutes in that house felt like a lifetime. The closest police station was in a town 9 miles away. A man's voice called out, "Police. Anyone here? Come on out." Relief ran through me so strongly that I almost passed out. I opened the bathroom door and then the bedroom door, and a deputy at the end of the hall swung his gun at me. I heard the scream again, but it was weaker this time, and then there was silence. Red and blue lights flashed across the bathroom window. The man from the woods was sprawled on the floor of the living room, his eyes staring blankly at the ceiling, one arm reaching upward as if frozen in mid-motion, blood pooling beneath his head. "Christ," one officer muttered. "Evans, call an ambulance." But it was too late. "Freeze! Wait," I cried. "I'm the one who called." They cuffed me anyway, marching me downstairs. I found out later that he was homeless and had been diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia. No one knew how he got onto our property. Perhaps he had been squatting nearby, or perhaps he had been wandering for miles. Blunt force trauma, most likely from a fall, was the cause of death. The screams were his own, his mind unraveling in terror before he hit the floor. I wasn't charged, of course, but the image of him lying there has never left me. When I told my grandfather the story, he said, "That's why I keep the Henry close." And he was right. You realize how thin the line is between safety and helplessness out there in the silence of the woods. I finished the press release that Monday, but I never stayed at the property alone again because sometimes, even in a place you think you know, there's always a reason to be afraid. I never considered myself to be paranoid. On the contrary, I was too trusting and too eager to assume the best. Levi, you're going to let the wrong person into your life one day if you don't wise up. My mother used to tell me every time. It was 2017, and I had just turned 23. I was living in Round Rock, Texas, just north of Austin, and I had managed to rent this small one-bedroom house that had been built in the 1970s. It wasn't fancy with thin walls, creaky floors, and a bathroom fan that moaned louder than a shower, but it was mine, my first real place without someone. Back then, she was talking about girlfriends, not strangers with knives. It wasn't glamorous, but the hours were steady and the rent was barely manageable. I worked at a small print shop in town, mostly running orders for banners, business cards, and the occasional wedding invite. I didn't go out much back then, and I'd fallen into a routine: work, get takeout, binge watch something on Netflix, crash, repeat. That Saturday night felt like any other. It was February, one of those nights when the temperature dropped just enough to cause fogging on your windows, but not enough to snow. The only light in the house was the glow from the television, so I had ordered a large pepperoni pizza from a local place down the street and left 2 slices cooling in a box on my coffee table. I had covered myself with a blanket and was halfway through a documentary that I doubt I would remember in the morning, when I remembered feeling a strange sense of peace, as if life wasn't perfect, but it was stable and safe. At first, I thought it was the wind, but then it came again, 3 sharp raps, deliberate, and I muted the TV and sat up, listening. My house was small enough that the front door was maybe 15 feet from where I was sitting, and while I could hear the faint hum of passing cars on the main road and the rustle of trees outside through the thin walls, I hadn't heard anyone pull into my driveway, and I could see the faint outline of my truck under the porch light from my couch. I wasn't expecting anyone, so I stood, pulled off the blanket, and crept toward the door, the groan of my bare feet deafening in the silence. And when I got there, I leaned into the peephole, and there was a woman. She was wearing faded jeans and a gray hoodie with a big pocket in front, and she had dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was not shivering, but the cold outside made me wish I had socks on. Her expression was neutral at first, but then she tilted her head slightly, as if she sensed my presence and forced a smile. "Hello," she said, her voice muffled but clear through the door. "Your neighbor is me. I need to call my hubby for a brief moment because my phone died. It's a bit of an emergency." My chest constricted. I knew my neighbors, not very well, but enough. The Harrisons, a retired couple who had lived there for decades, were to my left, and Trevor, a younger man who worked nights at Dell and drove a loud Camaro, was to my right. I had never seen this woman before, so I paused before asking, "Which house are you in?" She smiled broadly when I questioned her through the door. My gut twisted. Every instinct told me something was wrong, but another voice in my head countered. What if she was actually in trouble? 2 houses down. Just moved in last week. Sorry again. I wouldn't bother you if it wasn't important. Please, I just need to make one quick call. I considered my mother's words, then I considered how close the neighbors were in case something went wrong. So I told myself it would be okay. I unlatched the chain and opened the door just a crack, and the woman didn't wait for me to offer her in. Instead, she stepped forward right away, as if she had been waiting for that moment. Yes, I said clumsily, taking a step back. My phone is on the table right there. "Thanks," she said flatly, her tone now calmer, colder, and she began to walk toward the coffee table, where it sat next to the pizza box. She didn't look at the phone, the pizza, or anything else in my house the way a normal person would when they first enter someone's space. Instead, She stood in the doorway for a long time, her hands stuffed deep into the hoodie pocket, her eyes flicking once toward the door and then back at me. Something was wrong, because my pulse was pounding. She came to the table, but instead of picking up the phone, she turned. Her eyes were cold and calculating, and she had a knife in her hoodie pocket, a folding blade large enough to make my stomach drop. "Sit down," she said in a steady, almost casual voice, and I froze. Her tone left no room for debate. I sat with my legs shaking as I lowered myself onto the couch, my mind racing. I was alone, no one close enough to hear me if I screamed, and my phone was now practically bait, sitting 3 feet out of reach. "Hey," I said quickly, raising my hands. "You don't need to do this. If you need money, I'll give you money. Just take it. Sit down." After a moment of observing me, she turned to the door and opened it. Without saying anything, she simply waved her hand in a signal, and then I heard heavy, fast footsteps coming up the porch. My instincts took over, and I ran away without thinking or calculating my chances. Ran into the kitchen and banged against the back door. The latch remained locked for what seemed like an eternity before breaking, so I threw the door wide and staggered into the yard barefoot. "Get him!" she screamed, and voices behind me said, "Min, go deeper this time." I rushed and vaulted the back, my boots hitting the cold earth and the jagged gravel piercing into my soul. The Harrison's motion light flicked on, illuminating the grass like a stage spotlight, and I didn't care. I ran across their yard and around to the street, my lungs burning, but adrenaline pushed me forward. I ran toward the first house I saw with lights on, hammering on the door with everything I had. "Help, please. Someone's in my house," I yelled. "Call the police," I cried. "Please, someone's in my house," they tried. The door cracked open, and an older guy with wide eyes looked out, his wife hovering behind him. The wife grabbed the phone and dialed 911 with shaky hands as he wrenched the door open and forced me inside before slamming it shut. I crashed against the wall, my chest heaving, my entire body trembling so violently that I thought my teeth may break. The police searched my home when they got there. According to the officer who interviewed me, there had been a series of robberies in the area, with small groups targeting people at home alone. One of them would approach the door pretending to need help, while the others would wait. The front door was wide open, the pizza box was gone, and my phone was gone, but other than that, nothing was there. By the time they checked, there was no one inside, and there were no footprints in the yard. "You're lucky," he replied, staring me in the eye outside. "Typically, they leave no witnesses. The scariest thing isn't the knife or the footsteps hammering at my door, but rather how easy I allowed her in after a single moment of doubt." I moved out a month later, and I still check my hair routinely and cringe when I hear an unexpected knock. I always thought of myself as just another regular guy, someone who worked, paid his bills, and tried to keep to himself. Nothing dramatic, nothing glamorous. My world was simple, or at least it used to be. It was March of 2019. One small decision was all it took. I never imagined my life would turn into something people talk about in hushed tones. The kind of story that keeps you up at night long after it's over. It was a Tuesday night, one of those quiet Texas evenings after sunset, cool, but not chilly, quiet, but not silent. I was 28 years old at the time, living alone in a simple brick home I rented from a retired couple who spent most of the year in Florida. The house was unremarkable, with 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, hardwood floors, and a large backyard that sloped into the woods, which was what drew me in. There were no street lights behind the house, no inquisitive neighbors looking over the fence, just trees. I had moved to Tyler 3 years prior for work, and that job wasn't glamorous. I managed printing jobs at a small shop that handled everything from business cards to church bulletins. It was steady work, and I liked the routine. My boss, Mr. Langston, was one of those old-school Texans who had worked his way up from nothing and expected you to do the same. On summer nights, I would occasionally sit on the back porch with a beer, listening to the cycas, and thinking about how fortunate I was to have a place that felt tucked away from everything. However, as I've since learned, privacy can have its drawbacks. The majority of my family still resided in Henderson, approximately 30 miles south, and my mom, Paula, who called me at least twice a week, was concerned about me living alone, especially after my dad died when I was 23. You eating all right, Ben? Yes, Mom. I would say, rolling my eyes but still grinning in response to her question. You lock the doors at night? Refrain from leaving. That back porch is left open. Eat dough. Try not to worry too much. The loss of Daisy, my dog, who had been with me since college and was a shepherd mix with one floppy ear and eyes that always seemed to be in on a joke, was what really left a hole in my life. She worried anyhow. That was her job. She passed away 6 months prior to the break-in, and the silence in the house has been deafening ever since. Friends came and went, and some invited me out, but I didn't like going out to bars or crowded places, so I preferred coming home, making dinner, and relaxing in front of the TV. Home meant peace to me, or at least it used to. That Tuesday, I arrived home a little after 6 o'clock, and while it was baking, I threw a frozen pizza in the oven and sat on the couch, browsing through my phone. When it was finished, I drank a beer and ate it right out of the pan, something I never told my mother about. By 8 o'clock, the sun had completely set, and although my living room was bright from the television, outside the windows was completely dark. This is not unusual for my home. When night falls, it falls hard. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No dogs barking, no cars on the road, before everything turned dark. Power outages were rare in this part of town, but they did happen occasionally, so I thought I'd check the breaker box in the garage to make sure it wasn't my fault. I stood up, phone in hand, and then I noticed it. From the corner of my eye, I caught movement through the blinds and a narrow beam of light sweeping across the backyard. I sat there in the dark for a moment, blinking. Great, I muttered. I initially assumed it might be a neighbor, but there are no neighbors in my fenced backyard, and the closest house was a good 100 yards away. I knelt down by the window and cautiously lifted the corner of the curtain, my hands already shaking, and saw a man moving slowly, looking around the yard with his flashlight as if he was looking for something. He had a hood pulled over his head, and in his other hand, at first I couldn't tell, but then the light caught it, a crowbar. I ducked down and crawled to the coffee table where my phone was plugged in, my breathing too loud in my ears, and I forced my trembling hands to dial 911. 911. What's your emergency? There's a man in my backyard. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just any neighbor or lost hiker. He was here for a reason. The dispatcher's voice was steady and calm, and I murmured, he's got a crowbar. He's trying to get in. Okay, sir. I need you to stay calm. What's your name? Ben. Ben Carter. All right, Ben. I need you to find a secure location in your home where you can hide somewhere that is locked. Can you do that? Yes. Yes, the bathroom. It's in the center of the house. All right, go there now. Stay on the line with me. I'll walk down the hallway as silently as possible. Officers are already being sent to your location. Every creak in the wood made me flinch, so I slipped into the bathroom, locked the door, and turned off the light. I squatted in the bathtub, curling up small, my phone against my ear, whispering, I'm in the bathroom. You're doing great, Ben, the dispatcher said. Just stay quiet. Officers are close. Then there was the sound of glass breaking, and I almost screamed. The footsteps began, heavy, slow, thump, thump. He was going around the living room, opening doors, moving furniture, calm, methodical. He's inside. I inhaled. Stay cool. Stay where you are. Help is nearly there. He was checking each room one by one, and I squeezed my phone until my fingers cramped. I clamped my hand over my mouth, shaking uncontrollably. The dispatcher kept her voice steady and low, saying, You're okay. Just keep quiet. You're not alone. But I had never felt more alone. The footsteps grew closer down the hallway, past the first bedroom. The doorknob to the guest room rattled. Then the door creaked open. Then the floor creaked just outside the bathroom door. I held my breath. There was silence. Then there were yells. Sheriff's department. Drop it. The man ran away. I heard the rear door smash. I heard boots stomping across the floor. The floor. More yelling. A fight. The sound of someone hitting the floor. I remained motionless in the bathtub until the bathroom door knocked. Ben, Sheriff's department. You're safe. I shook my hands and unlocked the door. 2 deputies were standing there with flashlights and lowered weapons. I saw him in the living room. The deputies told me his name was Richard Lyle, and he had been hitting houses in the area for weeks. They said I was lucky. I called when I did, and I nodded numbly, unable to say much. He was handcuffed, face down, and had his hoodie pulled back. He wasn't a monster, and he wasn't even particularly intimidating, but he was a scruffy, average-looking man in his 30s, and that somehow made it worse. My house didn't feel like mine anymore, so I sat on the couch and stared at the broken window after the glass was boarded up. In the weeks that followed, I added motion lights, cameras, and new locks, and friends reassured me that at least I was safe. At least there was nothing more serious. But I didn't hear glass breaking or those footsteps in the hallway. In their house, years later, I still find it impossible to sit in the dark without my chest tightening. Every wind gust, and Brooke feels like his return. Because once your safe haven is never really safe again after someone has broken in. I also know that night will always be in my memory.